Hello, good evening. Welcome to the Italian Cultural Institute. Thank you for joining us tonight for the presentation of the book Dante's Performance, Music, Dance, and Drama in the Commedia by Professor Francesco Ciabattoni of Georgetown University, who is here with us this evening. Guiding us in this conversation is Professor Kristina Olson of the Department of Modern and Classical Languages of George Mason University, while Dr. Riccardo Pratesi will complement the discussion with his interpretation of Dante's verses. Professor Ciabattoni's book explores Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy under a new light by revealing elements inspired by processions, pageants, liturgical dramas, psalm singing, and dance performance. Highlighting the influence of medieval theories of performing arts on the Commedia, the volume offers an interpretation of Dante's frame of mind in presenting his literary journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven to his contemporaries. Thank you, Professor Ciabattoni, Professor Olson, and Dr. Pratesi for sharing your passion for the Divine Comedy with us. Finally, I would also like to thank the staff of the Italian Cultural Institute, Michele, Ferruccio, Pasquale, Carlotta, and Denise, as well as all of you for joining us tonight. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage Professor Francesco Ciabattoni, Kristina Olson, and Dr. Riccardo Pratesi.
Wow. So, thank you very much, Elettra Laduca. Thanks to the Istituto Italiano di Cultura. Thanks everyone who is here for coming to this presentation. This is Dante Day. It's Dante D in Italy, right? So I think it is the appropriate context and calendar to discuss Dante's Divine Comedy, hopefully under what I proposed it to be a new light. And I'm really happy that I'm here tonight with my friends, Professor Olson, Kristina, and Dr. Pratesi, Riccardo. We have known one another for a long time and collaborated on several Dantean projects. So it's wonderful to be here tonight for me, talking about Dante and my view of the performance in Dante's book.
Thank you all for being here. I'll join the voices that have already expressed thanks in being here with us this Tuesday evening. This new book by my friend Francesco, I will refer to him as Francesco, a collaborator on things Dantesque, but also Boccaccian, who we'll leave out tonight out of respect for both the book and the holiday. This is quite an original book for the field of Dante studies. We talk a lot about the ways in which Dante's poem, the Commedia, engages us, the ways in which the Commedia asks us to envision scenes, dialogue, encounters that are both pleasant, friendly, heavenly, and infernal. What is so interesting for me about Francesco's book, his most recent book, is the way in which it sort of traces out the nuances, the historical depth to how Dante incorporates both ancient and medieval, for him contemporary, ways of thinking about theater, about dialogue, ways in which Dante could have been influenced by what he even saw on the street in terms of sort of improvised performances, but also in terms of more standard traditions of theater, theatrical writing, and so forth. And really what I'd like to start off with in our conversation today is I'd like to ask Francesco a bit about how this book came to be. So often scholars tend to write, or we'll say sometimes they write within an arc, within a kind of trajectory that traces one interest and another, and that there's some sort of organic flow from one to the other. Now, Francesco's first book was titled Dante's Journey to Polyphony. This was published by the University of Toronto Press in 2014, which examines the ways in which music informs the Commedia. And he does so by sort of compartmentalizing, categorizing, I should say better, ideas of musicality within the three canticles between the Inferno, the Purgatorio, and the Paradiso. The idea of cacophony within the Inferno, harsh sounds that don't actually give us a sense of harmony or feelings of well-being, that we move to more of a sense of monophony in Purgatorio, right? So sort of that kind of solitary. I will let him. I am not a musical expert. I will let him define many of these terms for you, but I am a Dante scholar. And we move, of course, to polyphony, right? The sweet harmony of the heavenly spheres. So I'd like to ask Francesco if he could sort of elaborate a bit how he sees this current book on performance, not just musical, but also theatrical, but also the idea of performance written large, how this book, this second book, comes out of the first book. So,
Thank you, Kristina. I think you've explained it quite musically and proficiently too. So it is true, I moved from the topic of my first book, Dante's Journey to Polyphony, which was essentially musical, to the performative dimension of Dante's Commedia, which includes what Dante had experienced as a spectator, as a viewer, in churches and streets of the cities where he lived. So liturgical drama, sometimes even feasts of fools, carnivals, skits, which are, of course, to be found in the first canticle, in the Inferno, and to dance. There is a lot of dance in the poem, actually, especially in the Purgatory and the Paradiso, as we will learn directly from Dante's own words later when Riccardo will recite them in Italian for us. The idea of expanding my object of research about Dante's Commedia from music only to well-rounded or more or performative world in a way that involves all the senses stems from my methodology to try to recover the mindset and the experience of the medieval author and the medieval readership who lived in a world that was filled with these performances all the time. Music, as well as liturgical drama or street art, were pervasive in the Middle Ages. So whenever we, for example, let me just show the first slide that I'm going to share with you here. I selected these two tercets from Canto 9 of the Inferno. This is when Dante and Virgil approach the wall of Dis, the infernal city, and they are blocked by the devils. They have to rely on the help of a celestial messenger or an angel coming to force the doors open. And why do they pick these lines? Because this is a very common episode in medieval drama that stems from a famous episode in the Bible, the so-called harrowing of hell, when Christ, Jesus, during the night before his resurrection, goes to hell and defeats Satan, takes up the patriarchs to heaven. On the left of your screen, you can see in the original Italian and then English translation a passage from one of the many medieval dramas or plays that had this episode for a subject. And in particular, I selected the dialogue between Satan and the demons. In other words, this is one of the many examples in which Dante's poetry appeals to the readership by referring to a shared experience, a shared subtext, in a way, that is not simply verbal or written. We all know, if we've taken a Dante class in our lives, that Dante plays that game with his readers all the time, meaning that he refers to Virgil's poems or Ovid's, to the Psalms, to other parts of the Bible, to his contemporary friends, such as Guido Cavalcanti. So there's a lot of poetry, a lot of subtexts in the Divine Comedy that the readers need to be aware of in order to fully appreciate the content. In this case, the subtext is not a written one. I mean, we do have a transcription because we found that, because Alessandro d'Ancona in 1891 actually compiled a transcription of many of these old medieval plays. But a lot of the people who read the Divine Comedy wouldn't have read the text of a play. They would have viewed the play. So that is the kind of shared experience that I think is important we keep in our minds when we read Dante's Commedia. And in this case, in Inferno, there is a lot of physicality, a lot of action going on. And that makes for theatrical material, for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you for this, Francesco. So what interested me about one of the passages within your book, one of the many passages that fascinated me and made me think about this poem differently, is how we can read especially the first canticle differently. So the Inferno, which is, generally speaking, the part of the Commedia that most readers will know, especially many of us will know quite well, and actually many of us experts also feel most secure, I'll say, within the first canticle, as opposed to, say, the third canticle, Paradiso, where the concepts are quite philosophical, are quite metaphysical. That's where we start to feel out of our water with some of the concepts that Dante is giving us. Instead, in the Inferno, especially for students of Dante love the conflict that we see in a scene like this, that we see in many other scenes, such as with the Barraters.
That's right.
Which is something that perhaps we can talk about. But what I was particularly struck by was this idea, which I think is very novel, that Virgil is not just a guide. We know that Virgil is the guide, right, for Dante the Pilgrim within the first two realms of the afterlife, but that Virgil is also a kind of stage director. This, for me, which comes from one of the earlier chapters of your book, this for me is a really new way of thinking about the poem, that we're not just reading a poem that has been designed and envisioned by Dante, the poet, thinking of Virgil as a guide, as a father figure, but also as a literary influence, right? The author of the Aeneid, which is the literary antecedent for this work, right? But that he is a kind of collaborator within this greater theatrical project. I was wondering if you could just elaborate a bit more about that. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, that's a very good point. And Virgil, being Dante's guide for two canticles, for two-thirds of the journey, performs this role of the guide and the teacher. But he also has a few faux pas, like the one that we showed before. That's when the devils block their progression through hell. As a matter of fact, I would like to quote a beautiful essay by a colleague who is in the room today, Professor Gianni Cicali, also at Georgetown, who identifies or suggests the possible identification of Virgil with the role of the didaskalos, the teacher, or the stage director in medieval plays, because precisely, at least in some of the episodes, Virgil seems to take that role in the action that's going on. On screen here, I've listed some of the quotations from another very famous episode in Canto 21. It's an episode that takes up two cantos, actually, 21 and 22 of the Inferno. It's very theatrical, with a squad of devils. You can see this is a detail from Santa Maria Novella, the Spanish chapel, portraying the devils, and then also the blessed on the side, of course. But I'm sorry, let me go back to that image before, because I also placed an interesting line that Dante inserts at some point when he's about to tell and describe the fight of the devils. These devils are supposed to escort Dante and Virgil, but obviously they want to trick them, they want to get them and kill them, essentially. Kill Dante and keep Virgil there forever. Virgil is already dead. Dante, the poet, uses a line to address the reader. O tu che leggi, udirai nuovo ludo. Now, ludo, or sport, or performance, is a word that stems directly from, that comes directly from the language of performance and theater. But what is particularly striking about this line is that Dante uses two different verbs. Tu che leggi, you who read, udirai nuovo ludo. What about udirai? If you're reading, how do you hear anything? Well, this is a perfect example of how Dante conjures up and relies on the reader's imagination to go back to an experience that they have indeed heard and seen. And I believe, before I leave the stage to Riccardo for the performance of Canto 22, that the intentionality of Dante's theatrical poetry in Cantos 21 and 22, in particular here of the Inferno, is very clear from the language he uses, as Aurelio Roncaglia, one critic among many, has highlighted by listing some of those words that describe the action and the fast, the rapidity with which things take place. This is a moment of high dramaticity, and I use that word in both meanings. It's drama as theater, and it's drama as danger, because this is when Dante might be caught by the devils. And thanks to the disorganization of the devils themselves, who start a fight between themselves, Virgil and Dante safely escape to the next Bolgia. So thank you, Riccardo, for reciting it for us.
I hope that also those of you that don't understand Italian will be fascinated by those verses. So I put myself in the center. Io vidi già cavalier muover campo e cominciare stormo e far lor mostra e talvolta partir per loro scampo. Corridor vidi per la terra vostra, o Aresini, e vidi gir gualdane, fedir torneamenti e correr giostra, quando con trombe, quando con campane, con tamburi e con cenni di castella, e con cose nostrali e con istrane, né già con sì diversa cennamella cavalier vidi muover, né pedoni, né nave a segno di terra o di stella. Noi andavam con li 10 demoni. Ai, fiera compagnia, ma nella chiesa coi santi e in taverna co ghiottoni. Pur alla pegola era la mia intesa, per veder della bolgia ogni contegno e della gente che entro vera incesa, come i dalfini quando fanno segno ai marinar con l'arco della schiena, che s'argomentin di campar lor legno, talor così ad alleggiar la pena mostrava alcun de peccatori il dosso e nascondea in men che non balena. E come all'orlo dell'acqua d'un fosso stanno i ranocchi pur col muso fuori, sicché celano i piedi e l'altro grosso, si stavan d'ogni parte i peccatori, ma come s'appressava barbariccia, così si ritraean sotto i bollori. Io vidi, e anco il cor me n'accapriccia, uno aspettar così come l'incontra che una rana rimane e un'altra spiccia. E graffia anche gli era più d'incontra, gli arruncigliò le impegolate chiome e trasse il su che mi parve una lontra. Io sapea già di tutti quanti il nome, li notai quando furono eletti, e poi che si chiamaro, attesi come. Oh rubicante, fa che tu gli metti gli unghioni addosso sì che tu lo scuoi, gridavan tutti insieme i maladetti. E io, maestro mio, fa se tu puoi, che tu sappi chi è lo sciagurato venuto a man degli avversari suoi. Lo duca mio si s'accostò al lato, domandò l'onde fosse, e quei rispose: io fui del regno di Navarra nato. Mia madre a servo d'un signor mi pose che m'avea generato d'un ribaldo, distruggitor di sé e di sue cose. Poi fui famiglia del buon re Tebaldo. Quivi mi misi a far baratteria, di chi io rendo ragione in questo caldo. E Ciriatto, a cui di bocca uscì ad ogni parte una zanna come a un porco, li fe sentir come l'una sdrucia. Tra male gatte era venuto il sorco, ma Barbariccia il chiuse con le braccia dicendo: state in là, mentre io lo inforco. E al maestro mio volse la faccia. Domanda, disse, ancor se più disì saper da lui, pria altri il disfaccia. Lo duca dunque. Ordi degli altri rii, conosci tu alcun che sia latino sotto la pece? E quelli, io mi partii poco da un che fu di là vicino. Così fossi ancor con lui coperto, ch'io non temerei unghia né uncino. E l'ibicocco, troppo aven sofferto, disse, e preseli il braccio col runciglio, sicché stracciando ne portò un lacerto. Draghignazzo anco i volle dar di piglio giuso alle gambe, onde il decurio loro si volse intorno intorno con mal piglio. Quand'elli un poco rappasciati foro, a lui che ancor mirava sua ferita, domandò il duca mio senza dimoro: chi fu colui da cui mala partita di che facesti per venire a proda? Ed ei rispose: fu frate Gomita, quel di Gallura, vasel d'ogni froda, ch'ebbe i nemici di suo donno in mano, e fe sì lor che ciascun se ne loda. Danar si tolse e lasciolli di piano, siccome dice, e negli altri uffici anche barattier fu non picciol, ma sovrano. Usa con esso donno Michel Zanche di Logodoro, e a dir di Sardigna le lingue lor non si sentono stanche. Come vedete l'altro che digrigna. Io direi anco, ma io temo che ello non sa parecchio a grattarmi la tigna. E il gran proposto, volto a Farfarello che stralunava gli occhi per fedire, disse: fatti incostà, malvagio uccello. Se voi volete vedere o udire, ricominciò lo spaurato appresso, toschi o lombardi, io ne farò venire, ma stieno i malebranche un poco in cesso, sicché non teman delle loro vendette, e io, seggendo in questo loco stesso, per un ch'io son, ne farò venir 7, quando io suffolerò, come è nostruso di fare allor che fuori alcun si mette. Cagnazzo a cotal motto levò il muso crollando il capo e disse: oh, di malizia egli ha pensata per gittarsi giuso. Ond'ei, ch'avea lacciuoli a grandi vizia, rispose: malizioso son io troppo, quando io procuro a miei maggior tristizia. Alighieri non si tenne e di rintoppo agli altri disse a lui: se tu ti cali, io non ti verrò dietro di gualoppo, ma batterò sovra la pesce l'ali. Lascisi il collo e sia la ripa scudo, a veder se tu sol più di noi vali. O tu che leggi, udirai nuovo ludo. Ciascun dall'altra costa gli occhi volse, quel prima che a ciò fare era più crudo. Lo navarrese ben suo tempo colse, fermò le piante a terra e in un punto saltò e dal proposto lor si sciolse. Del che ciascun di colpa fu compunto, ma quei più che cagion fu del difetto, però si mosse e gridò: tu sei giunto! Ma poco i valse, che l'ali al sospetto non potero avanzar, quelli andò sotto e quei drizzò volando suso il petto. Non altrimenti l'anitra di botto, quando il falcon s'appressa, giù s'attuffa e quei ritorna su crucciato e rotto. irato al caprina della buffa, volando dietro li tenne invaghito che quei campasse per aver la zuffa, e come il barattier fu disparito, così volse gli artigli al suo compagno e fu con lui sovra il fosso ghermito, ma l'altro fu bene sparvier grifagno ad artigliar ben lui, ed amendue cadder nel mezzo del bogliente stagno. Lo caldo sghermidor subito fue, ma però di levarsi era neente, sia vie non viscate l'ali sue. Barbariccia con gli altri suoi dolente, 4 ne fe volar dall'altra costa con tutti i raffi, e assai prestamente di qua di là discesero alla posta, porser gli uncini verso l'impaniati, eran già cotti dentro della crosta, e noi lasciammo loro così impacciati.
It's amazing. Grazie. So amazing. Well, you got the high level of drama and conflict, right? And almost the comicity, right, that you can actually come across in those cantos that deal with the barrators. You had mentioned earlier, of course, barratry, which is the state, which is the sin, right, according to Dante's different categories of sin, which is corruption within the state as opposed to simony, right, which is corruption within the church. Barratry is very close to Dante within real life because, of course, he is accused on a false charge of barratry, according to some sources, which eventually leads to his exile from Florence. So there's been some speculation, which I believe that you disagree with or agree with, that perhaps there's such a high level of theatricality within these cantos to kind of distract the reader from the fact that this is a sin that is very close to Dante, the person, right? And that it is a way of obfuscating the way in which he relates to this particular sin. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Rather than agreeing or disagreeing, I believe that the way we should view these two highly theatrical cantos is a way of where the ridicule is protagonist and comicity, as you said. By the way, before I continue on that in that direction, maybe we should address the problem of the title of this poem. It's called Commedia. Obviously, as Giovanni Boccaccio tells us, it is called Commedia because it is a happy ending story, and it is a commedia because of the language that is largely drawing from the lowlier layers of language. We should not be fooled, Boccaccio warns us, by the notion of comedy as theater, because in a comedy as theater, there is never a narrator who tells the story. And Dante is everywhere as a narrator. So obviously, this is not the same genre. But commedia is comical, at least in some parts and in certain episodes. And this is one of them. The ridicule, I believe, here is important because it has been, some critics have suggested that behind the devils who fight also in attempts to catch the escaping sinner Ciampolo of Navarre, to whom Riccardo lent his voice, they are highly ridiculous as they fall into the boiling pitch, which is what the sinners are supposed to be in as their punishment. Perhaps the reason that Dante envisioned this canto as a high travesty of politics and a high travesty also of the military duties that these devils are unable to discharge. At the very beginning of the canto, there is a reference to a battle in which Dante had actively fought in 1289 and won. Perhaps the reason is exactly that Dante wants to ridicule his enemies, and in particular, those who exiled him in Florence. It is an interpretation. It is difficult to say whether it is certainly true, but it is interesting nonetheless to go and look at the names of these devils. Dragignazzo, Rubicante, Farfacane, Barbariccia. These names appear in an early Renaissance, meaning 14th century, so late 14th century, play that I've copied here, including a translation, still from d'Ancona's collection. Now, of course, this is probably later than Dante's poem, so the influence would be that whoever wrote these lines for the play had Dante on his mind. But it is a testimony, it is a clear example that that passage is so apt to be played out, to be also represented in the city squares. As a matter of fact, the devils in Canto 22, the devils who run away from their duty and they start fighting, actually seem to mirror a device of medieval theater called the discursus per plateam of the devils. The diablerie, with the French word, were a genre of medieval theater where actors impersonated devils precisely. And the discursus, or the run, the foray through the aisles or through the area where the audience would be, discursus per plateam, is exactly that. The devils here are invading a space that is not theirs. So there is a parallel, a structural parallel there that we can see very clearly.
Fascinating. So this is the area really that for many first-time readers of Dante, we feel like, okay, we know that we're in hell. We have the demons, we have the devils, we have the pitchforks, especially if you can go back to the Dore image from before, right?
Which one, this one?
Oh, no, sorry. Go ahead to exactly.
Oh, this. Oh, yeah.
So here we have, right? This is sort of what we anticipate most of hell to be like when we come to Dante's poem for the first time. In essence, though, it's actually quite isolated, right? This isn't what we encounter most of the time. Most of the time within the Inferno, we have moments of high theatricality, even between Dante the Pilgrim and the souls whom he encounters. For example, a highly charged emotional moment where he meets with Farinata de Uberti in Canto 10, who is one of the heretics, his tomb-mate Cavalcante dei Cavalcanti, who's there. That whole moment has its own type of stage directions that the poet weaves in. But getting back to this idea of what we're finding here in this conflict as being something that would be witnessed by people within the streets of the more carnivalesque, so to speak. This is what you mark as being the trademark of the Inferno, the first canticle. When we move into the second canticle within Purgatorio, which of course includes the pilgrim's ascent with Virgil up the mountain, you trace more the influence, not of medieval drama, but of liturgical drama. So perhaps you could elaborate more on that.
Yes, well, liturgical drama, once again, was present in every city, in every town, and it was represented sometimes without a script, sometimes with more of a precise script. And well, I'm going to skip on some of these to go to another passage in Purgatorio Canto 8 that is highly reminiscent of a sacred play. We don't know precisely which one, but it could be any of the many plays that we find, for example, in Alessandro d'Ancona's collection or Ludovico Antonio Muratori's collection. So there were these 18th and 19th and earlier 19th century and earlier scholars who collected many ancient manuscripts, which clearly show some structural or even some structural elements in common with Dante's episodes. This one that also is drawn by Gustave Doré, who in 1867 published the whole collection of the illustrations of the Divine Comedy. This one is about the Valley of the Rulers, negligent rulers, who, however, repented and are waiting to atone in Purgatory. At some point, this scene happens. Everyone falls silent. After singing, there was a prayer sung together by the whole community of the rulers. Everyone falls silent, and two angels with two fiery swords. They're blunt swords, by the way. I don't know if that is clear from the image, but Dante takes care of specifying that due spade affocate, two flaming swords, their pointed blade tips broken off. That is important because all these elements actually return, and these angels, by the way, are chasing a snake. This is a highly also dramaturgical moment that Dante probably saw acted out somewhere. We can't pinpoint exactly the drama, but we can find elements. For example, in Genesis, we do find the Glaudium Flammeum, or the fiery sword. So this is something that is in the Bible and probably trickled down as an element, as a prop even, into medieval drama. And there's a Lauda Drammatica from Umbria from the 13th century that d'Ancona includes, that has an Angelus Occidens ante Christum, or an angel killing the Antichrist with a fiery sword, cum spada inis. Elsewhere, we find another Lauda that says that in the Advent Sunday, two kings come with the Antichrist. So we have this duality returning. And also in the Gospel of Luke, we have two swords. Domine ecce duo gladic. This has been taken to represent the duality of powers in the Middle Ages. Dante quotes this passage by Luke in the Monarchy. And by the way, this is also quoted by, the same passage by Luke is also quoted in Dante's arch enemy's papal bull, Boniface VIII. He also uses that passage with the two fiery swords. This is all to say that liturgical texts, dramaturgical texts, the Bible, poetry, all mingle together, and Dante uses all these sources, drawing from the reader's experience as readers of other texts and as viewers, to represent a fascinating and a powerful silent scene. By the way, let it be said that in the sacred representation in Canto 8, Dante specifies that no words are spoken, there's only action. Obviously, we read words to describe the scene, but there is no sound going on. It is entirely silent, so it is all visual. It's like watching a silent movie from the 1920s. For Dante, the spectator inside the poem. This is highly, this is very frequent. I could actually, I'm going to skip on the quotations in Latin because I don't want to bore everybody. But there is at least another passage that I want to mention today, and it is in Canto 30 of Purgatory. Canto 30 is a central canto in the development of the story, because that's when Dante's beloved woman, Beatrice, who is also his guardian angel in many ways, his inspiration and protector, comes back. After 10 years after her death, she reappears as a blessed soul at the top of Mount Purgatory. And in order to prepare for this momentous event, Dante the poet draws from, once again, liturgical texts and liturgical drama. One of the most famous scenes and images about this return of Beatrice is the three poets. It's Dante, Virgil, and Statius, a Roman poet who had converted to Christianity by reading Virgil, who was a pagan. because Virgil had something about his poetry where he spoke about the child who will save the world out of a virgin. So he was considered a prophet in the Middle Ages. Statius, Dante, and Virgil approach the place where they know that Beatrice will reappear. And there is a rain of white lilies coming down in the presence of angels. Now, this highlighted line, manibus odate lilia plenis, of give out lily flowers with your full hands, is actually Virgil's line. The line is from the Aeneid. However, I believe there might be another subtext yet. It would not be the first time that Dante uses sacred text and the classical text to create something new in his poetry. The other text that I'm referring to is actually in the ordinal book of the Cathedral of Padua. The ordinal book is a bit of the script of the Mass. For Easter Sunday, this ordinal book, which is dated 1275 in the city of Padua, and Dante had lived in Verona. Verona is maybe 40 miles out of Padua, and they used the same liturgy. So whatever we read in the ordinal book of Padua also was used in Verona to direct the calendar of the Mass. So for Easter Sunday, we find that an angel, actually two angels, duo scholares ad modum angelorum, to canonics, dressed like angels, with wings and lily flowers in their hands, are sitting on the tomb of Christ. And now you can see the thematic connection between this scene in the ordinal book of Padua and Verona and Dante's Return of Beatrice, because it is a scene of resurrection in both cases. Beatrice is coming back to meet his ancient friend Dante as a savior, just as Jesus is about to resurrect as a savior. So it is debatable, of course. Did Dante see the play of Easter Sunday in the liturgy of Padua and Verona? Well, he lived there several years, so I would say that there is a chance, and it is significant that it is precisely the lilies. By the way, let me say, in medieval plays, oftentimes the role of women was actually played by male actors. And so you may remember the scene of the three Marys approaching the tomb of Christ, and the angel sitting on the tomb saying, "He has resurrected, he is not here." So the three Marys are a parallel of the three poets approaching the place where Beatrice will reappear. I find a fascinating structural reference there with this play, and what eventually was the most represented episode in medieval theater, the Visitation of the Sepulchre, Visitatio Sepulchri. So that's the most frequently staged episode in the Bible. Also, the one that gives origin to all of medieval theater, the earliest episode in the Bible. And I believe that with this, we can once again leave the stage and the floor to Riccardo, who will recite Canto 30 with the return of Beatrice, which is a wonderful moment. Oh, yes, actually, I'm sorry. Thank you, Kristina. If you wish, you can follow the text online. You can Google Digital Dante, Columbia University, where you can find the text in Italian and the parallel translation by Alan Mandelbaum. So in English, of course. So if you desire more clarity and follow the recitation, that is a way to go.
This is going to be Purgatory 30.
30, yes, thank you.
You want me to wait for you to find the canto? Otherwise.
Let it be added also that Dante and his company here are in the Garden of Eden at this point. So they have gone all the way up the mountain through the punishments of those who will be saved, the purgatorial souls. And at this point, there's no longer any pain. Dante is actually crowned by Virgil as master of himself. Io te sovra te corono in mitrio. I make you your own master, and you cannot fail anymore.
Quando il settentrion del primo cielo, che né occaso mai seppe, né orto, né d'altra nebbia che di colpa velo, e che faceva lì ciascuno accorto di suo dover, come il più basso face, qual temon gira per venire a porto, fermo s'affisse, la gente verace, venuta prima tra il grifone ed esso, al carro volse sé come a sua pace. E un di loro, quasi da ciel messo, veni sponsa de Libano, cantando gridò 3 volte, e tutti gli altri appresso. Quali beati al novissimo bando surgeran presti, ognun di sua caverna, la rivestita voce alleluiando, cotali in sulla divina basterna si levar 100 ad vocem tanti senis, ministri e messagger di vita eterna. Tutti dicean benedictus qui venis, e fior gittando di sopra e d'intorno manibus, date lilia plenis. Io vidi già del cominciar del giorno la parte oriental tutta rotata e l'altro ciel di bel sereno adorno, e la faccia del sol nascere ombrata, sicché per temperanza di vapori l'occhio la sostenea lunga fiata, così dentro una nuvola di fiori che dalle mani angeliche saliva e ricadeva in giù dentro e di fuori, sovra candido vel cinta d'uliva, donna m'apparve sotto verde manto, vestita di color di fiamma viva. E lo spirito mio, che già cotanto tempo era stato che alla sua presenza non era di stupor, tremando, affranto, senza degli occhi aver più conoscenza, per occulta virtù che da lei mosse, d'antico amor sentì la gran potenza. Tosto che nella vista mi percosse l'alta virtù che già m'avea trafitto, prima ch'io fuor di puerizia fosse, volsimi alla sinistra, col rispitto col quale il fantolin corre alla mamma quando ha paura o quando egli è afflitto, per dicere a Virgilio: men che dramma di sangue m'è rimaso che non tremi, conosco i segni dell'antica fiamma. Ma Virgilio aveva lasciati scemi di sé. Virgilio, dolcissimo padre, Virgilio, a cui per mia salute diemi, né quantunque per Deo l'antica madre valse alle guance nette di rugiada, che lagrimando non tornasse ratre. Dante, perché Virgilio se ne vada, non piangere anco, non piangere ancora, che pianger ti convien per altra spada. Quasi ammiraglio che in poppa ed in prora viene a veder la gente che ministra per gli altri legni ed a ben farli in cora, in sulla sponda del carro sinistra, quando mi volsi al suon del nome mio, che di necessità qui si registra, vidi la donna che pria m'appario velata sotto l'angelica festa, drizzar gli occhi ver me di qua dal rio, tanto che il vel che le scendea di testa, cerchiato delle fronde di Minerva, non la lasciasse parer manifesta, regalmente nell'atto ancor proterva continuò, come colui che dice e il più caldo parlar dietro riserva. Guardaci ben son, Beatrice, come degnasti d'accedere al monte? Non sapei tu che qui è l'uom felice? Gli occhi mi cadder giù nel chiaro fonte, ma veggendomi in esso mi trassi all'erba. Tanta vergogna mi gravò la fronte. Così la madre al figlio par superba, come ella parve a me, perché d'amaro sente il sapor della pietade acerba. Ella si tacque, e gli angeli cantaro di subito, in te, Domine, speravi, ma oltre pedes meos non passaro. Sì come neve tra le vive travi per lo tosso d'Italia si congela, soffiata e stretta dagli venti schiavi, poi liquefatta in se stessa trapela, purché la terra che perde ombra spiri, sicché par foco fonder la candela, così fui senza lagrime e sospiri, anzi il cantar di quei che notan sempre dietro alle note degli eterni giri. Ma poi che intesi nelle dolci tempre lor compasire a me, più che se detto avesser donna, perché sì lo stempre, lo gel che m'era intorno al cor ristretto, spirito e acqua fessi, e con angoscia della bocca e degli occhi uscì del petto. Ella, pur ferma in sulla detta coscia del carro stando, alle sustanze pie volse le sue parole così poscia. Voi vigilate nell'eterno die, sicché notte né sonno a voi non fura, passo che faccia il secol per sue vie. Onde la mia risposta è con più cura che mi intenda colui che di là piagne, perché sia colpa e duol d'una misura. Non pur per ovra delle rote magne che drizzan ciascun seme ad alcun fine, secondo che le stelle son compagne, ma per larghezza di grazie divine, che sì alti vapori hanno allor piova, che nostre viste là non van vicine. Questi fu tal nella sua vita nova virtualmente, ogni abito destro fatto averebbe in lui mirabil prova. Ma tanto più maligno e più silvestro si fa il terren col mal seme non colto, quant'egli ha più di buon vigor terrestro. Alcun tempo il sostenni col mio volto, mostrando gli occhi giovanetti a lui. Meco il menava in dritta parte volto, sì tosto come in sulla soglia fui di mia seconda etade mutai vita. Questi si tolse a me e di essi altrui. Quando di carne a spirito era salita e bellezza e virtù cresciuta m'era, fui io a lui men cara e men gradita, e volse i passi suoi per via non vera, imagini di ben seguendo false che nulla promission rendono intera, né l'impetrare ispirazion mi valse, con le quali e in sogno e altrimenti lo revocai, sì poco a lui ne calse. Tanto giù cadde, che tutti argomenti alla salute sua eran già accorti, fuor che mostrargli le perdute genti. Per questo visitai l'uscio de morti, e a colui che l'acqua su condotto, i prieghi miei, piangendo, furon porti. alto fato di Dio sarebbe rotto se le tesi passasse e tal vivanda fosse gustata senza alcuno scotto di pentimento che lacrime spanda.
That was probably the best recitation I've heard of Purgatorio 30. Really moving. I'm not sure about you, but you could really hear the departure of Virgil, how sad he is. The sudden arrival of Beatrice, who's there like an ammiraglio di poppa, as an admiral who's there to sort of say, don't cry now, Dante, you're going to cry for something else. And how, with authority, she tells the story of how Dante's love changed. Dante's love for her changed as he went on to follow and fall in love with things that are false, right? So that was beautiful.
I agree.
Good. It was really beautiful. So I know we have more things to say about Purgatorio, but can we talk about dance?
Yes, we can talk about dance. We should talk about dance.
We've talked about conflict. We've talked about music and drama. Conflict, by conflict, I mean drama. We've talked about the musicality, but there's also a lot of dancing that happens. We get a bit of it here within the procession, within the Garden of Eden, but there's a lot of it surprisingly within Paradise, which tends to be the canticle that does not entertain and engage first-time readers of Dante, perhaps, as much as the Inferno does. There is a lot of physical movement, however, that happens within the spheres. So I don't know if you want to talk a bit about dance.
There is a lot of dance indeed.
Or do you want to go to something else?
In both Purgatory and Paradise. In the Paradiso, probably where we are heading now at this point to continue our journey with Dante. Well, I don't think I have an image that represents dance, but I'm going to transition to this. Because obviously you can't have dance without music. One of the most striking passages, I believe, in Dante's Paradiso comprises 4 cantos, cantos 10 to 14. That is the heaven of the sun, in which the souls of the blessed theologians gather around Beatrice and Dante into circular garlands. There's 24 of them. These are among the most famous doctors of the church and theologians, including Saint Bonaventure, Saint Thomas Aquinas, Albert the Great. They all swiftly move around the 2 visitors here, and Dante compares them to donne non da ballo sciolte, to women who haven't stopped dancing yet. And there's another passage, even in Canto 24 of the Paradiso, where Saint John is also compared to a maiden dancing. I suspect that the main reason for the poet here to subvert genders is to represent suppleness and the agility of these otherwise quite stern figures in our imagination. And they are dancing to celebrate. It is a choreography of celebration and of joy, to express physical joy. Now, this is quite unique, because as we know, as we can easily imagine, dance was often looked or frowned upon, during the Middle Ages, especially priests could not dance in church. I mean, some did. There were explicit prohibitions issued by typically local bishops here and there against priests to dance in the church. Why would you do that? Because priests were dancing. And so they had to stop the frolicking. But to be honest, the frolicking here in the Paradise happens in such a convincing and pure way with these important theologians dancing that it doesn't hurt the result, the poetic result. Actually, it enhances it. As the theologians are dancing in the heaven of the sun, they also sing. And the way that they sing is quite astonishing. Dante uses the word tempra, which means melange or mix of sounds, suggesting, in my reading, that that is a polyphonic song. There will be several passages throughout the Paradiso where polyphony is hinted at. That is a big deal. We may not realize this today, but once again, we'll have to go back 7 centuries and try to see what the historical, cultural, and in this case, theological context was for polyphony and monophony. So, monophony is singing together, maybe even a bunch of people, but in unison, singing the same thing. And this was the way that monks would, for example, perform the Liturgy of the Hours, Gregorian chant, essentially. That was the repertory, the psalms. They were performed regularly every day. Otherwise, towards the mid-13th century, I would say, in France especially, a new style of music arose. The polyphonic compositions of Perrotin was the main composer at the Notre Dame Cathedral during the 13th century. And I want to show you something. I'm going to skip ahead and then I will go back again. Forgive me for that. This is what a written polyphony song looks like in 4 parts. Now, why was it a big deal theologically? Gregorian chant, the monophonic version of the Psalms, the monophonic setting of the Psalms, was very clearly enunciated. If we were to sing Latin today, maybe with the help of our actor for the diction, then the words would have to be very clearly pronounced. And we would have to all agree about when to change, because they didn't have the same notion of tempo as we have today. They have something called tactus, which was more syllable driven. But it was very clear. The audience would understand and probably already know the words because these were the psalms being chanted out. In this kind of music here, words become almost unrecognizable, almost subservient to the aesthetic effect of music. So there is a papal bull, actually, by John the 22nd, dating 1322, so 1 year after Dante's death, also placing a prohibition, or a limitation rather, on polyphonic singing, because the thing was becoming out of control. This is the effect of polyphonic music to, let me actually get it, to Viderunt Omnes, which is a song from Perrotin's collection. Okay, so we made it through the first syllable of the song. You can see how this is of primary importance if the message of a psalm is to go through, to reach to those who are listening, then there's no way you can follow unless you already know the song, of course. So there was a problem with the meaning here. Dance in the Paradise is something that conveys physical joy, a joy that is purified and stripped of all physicality, because the blessed in Dante's Paradiso are not even shaped like humans, unlike Purgatorio and Inferno, where they have these aerial bodies that imitate the features of the people who had lived. dancing in paradise is made by bulging bulbs of light. So all the souls do not have a physical human appearance, but they are lights, like balls of light. And this is beautiful. In many cases, Dante actually describes the movement of these luminescent spheres taking shapes, even spelling out words at times. Then in Paradiso 30, these souls sort of take off their masks and they reveal themselves. This is one of the final cantos of the poem, and the scene that we are about to see in the white rose, which is that figure over there. This is a sort of a theater, like the seats, where all the blessed souls permanently reside. A mirror image of the funnel of hell that other writers previous to Dante actually had represented as a theater. I'm thinking of Ralph of Coggeshall in the Vision of Thurkin, for example. He explicitly compares hell to a theater with metal chairs, not nearly as comfortable as the ones you're sitting. This is the in bono rendition of that. So it's another sort of an amphitheater. Actually, one of Dante's early commentators, Benvenuto da Imola, if I remember correctly, made the parallel with the Arena of Verona. And the luminescent balls here are taking off their masks, revealing their features, as in a dramatis persona at the end of the book. This is when Saint Bernard takes the leading role from Beatrice. Saint Bernard plays the didascalus, indeed, probably more than Virgil, as the stage director here, mentioning several of the souls who are now taking back their seats in heaven and welcoming Dante for the final stretch of his journey. I believe the beauty of the scene will be clear again in Riccardo's recitation of Canto 30 of the Paradiso. If you wish to go to the Columbia Digital Dante project to follow, you're free to do so. But thank you once again, Riccardo, for this.
Forse 6.000 miglia di lontano ci ferve l'ora sesta, e questo mondo china già l'ombra quasi al letto piano, quando il mezzo del cielo a noi profondo comincia a farsi tal che alcuna stella perde il parere infino a questo fondo. E come vien la chiarissima ancella del sol più oltre, così il ciel si chiude di vista in vista infino alla più bella. Non altrimenti il trionfo che lude sempre d'intorno al punto che mi vinse, parendo inchiuso da quel che l'inchiude, a poco al mio veder si stinse, perché tornar con gli occhi a Beatrice nulla vedere ed amor mi costrinse. Se quanto infino a qui di lei si dice fosse conchiuso tutto in una loda, poco sarebbe a fornir questa vice. La bellezza ch'io vidi si trasmoda non pur di là da noi, ma certo io credo che solo il suo fattor tutta la goda. Da questo passo vinto mi concedo, più che giammai da punto di suo tema soprato fosse comico o tragedo, che come sole in viso che più trema, così lo rimembrar del dolce riso, la mente mia da me medesmo scema. Dal primo giorno ch'io vidi il suo viso in questa vita, infino a questa vista, non m'è il seguire al mio cantar preciso, ma or convien che mio seguir desista più dietro a sua bellezza poetando, come all'ultimo suo ciascuno artista. O tal qual io la lascio a maggior bando che quel della mia tuba, che deduce l'ardua sua matera terminando, con atto e voce di spedito duce incominciò: noi siamo usciti fore del maggior corpo al ciel che è pura luce, luce intellettual, piena d'amore, amor di vero ben, pien di letizia, letizia che trascende ogni dolzore. Qui vedrai l'una e l'altra milizia di paradiso, e l'una in quelli aspetti che tu vedrai all'ultima giustizia. Come subito lampo che discetti gli spiriti visivi, sì che priva dall'atto l'occhio di più forti obietti, così mi circonfulse luce viva e lasciommi fasciato di tal velo del suo fulgor che nulla m'appariva. Sempre l'amor che queta questo cielo accoglie in sé con sì fatta salute per far disposto a sua fiamma il candelo. Non fuor piuttosto dentro a me venute queste parole brevi, ch'io compresi me sormontar di sovra mia virtute, e di novella vista mi raccesi, tale che nulla luce è tanto mera che gli occhi miei non si fosser difesi, e vidi lume in forma di rivera, fulvido di fulgore, intra due rive dipinte di mirabil primavera. Di tal fiumana uscian faville vive, e d'ogni parte si mettienne fiori, quasi rubin che oro circunscrive. Poi, quasi inebriate dagli odori, riprofondavan sé nel miro gurge, e s'una entrava, un'altra n'uscia fuori. L'alto disio che mo ti infiamma e urge d'aver notizia di ciò che tu vei, tanto mi piace più quanto più t'urge. Ma di quest'acqua convien che tu bei, prima che tanta sete in te si sazzi. Così mi disse il sol degli occhi miei. Anco soggiunse: il fiume e li topazzi che entrano ed escono e il rider dell'erbe son di lor vero umbriferi prefatti. Non che da sé sian queste cose acerbe, ma è difetto dalla parte tua che non hai viste ancor tanto superbe. Non è fantin che sì subito rua col volto verso il latte se si svegli molto tardato dall'usanza sua, come fec'io, per far migliori spegli ancor degli occhi, chinandomi all'onda che si deriva perché vi si megli. E sì come di lei bevve la gronda delle palpebre mie, così mi parve di sua lunghezza divenuta tonda. Poi, come gente stata sotto larve, che pare altro che prima, se si sveste la sembianza non sua in che disparve, così mi si cambiaro in maggior feste li fiori e li faville, sicch'io vidi ambo le corti del ciel manifeste. Oh, splendor di Dio, per cui io vidi l'alto trionfo del regno verace, dammi virtù a dir com'io il vidi. Lume è lassù che visibile face lo creatore a quella creatura che solo in lui vedere ha la sua pace, e si distende in circular figura, intanto che la sua circunferenza sarebbe al sol troppo larga cintura. Fassi di raggio tutta sua parvenza riflessa al sommo del mobile primo, che prende quindi vivere e potenza. Come clivo in acque l'acqua di suo imo si specchia, quasi per vedersi adorno, quand'è nel verde e nei fioretti opimo, sì, sovrastando il lume intorno intorno, vidi specchiarsi in più di 1000 soglie quanto di noi lassù fatto ha ritorno. E se l'infimo grado in sé raccoglie sì grande lume, quanta è la larghezza di questa rosa nelle estreme foglie. Lo viso mio nell'ampio e nell'altezza non si smarriva, ma tutto prendeva il quale e il quanto di quella allegrezza. Presso e lontano lì non pon né leva, che dove Dio senza mezzo governa, la legge natural nulla rileva. Nel giallo della rosa sempiterna, che si dilata ed ingrada e redole odor di lode al sol che sempre verna, qual è colui che tace e dicer vole, mi trasse Beatrice e disse: mira quanto è il convento delle bianche stole, vedi nostra città quant'ella gira, vedi li nostri scanni sì ripieni, che poca gente più ci si disira. E in quel gran seggio a che tu gli occhi tieni, per la corona che già v'è su posta, prima che tu a queste nozze ceni, sederà l'alma che fia giù agosta dell'alto arrigo, e a drizzare Italia verrà in prima che ella sia disposta. La cieca cupidigia che va malia, simili fatti va al fantorino che muor per fame e caccia via la balia. E fia prefetto nel foro divino allora tal che in palese incoverto non anderà con lui per un cammino, ma poco poi sarà da Dio sofferto nell'alto ufficio, che il sarà detruso laddove Simon Mago è per suo merto, e farà quel Dalagna intrar più giuso.
That was also brilliant. You have a wonderful Beatrice. Can I just say? So authoritative.
I'll have to cut my beard.
Thank you so much for that. So to conclude our conversation here, I would like to maybe ask a question of both of you. You've been talking about the ways in which there's so many aspects of performance that are integrated into the poem in ways that we can see in ways that we don't see on the surface of the text. Gianfranco Contini once said that Dante needs to be performed. So we've heard it tonight with these 3 masterful recitations by Riccardo. How else do we set Dante to the stage?
I wouldn't know
Is it
how.
possible?
This is the only possible way.
So I think that that's fascinating to think that there's so much performativity within the text. And we've heard and we've experienced how moving it is to hear the text recited. But to actually have the text performed presents so many practical problems.
Well, yes. Some have tried. There are operas after Dante's text. But I believe that if we are to... So the operas, however, do not use Dante's very lyrics. They are inspired. If we are to hear Dante's words, it has to be Dante's own words. And about how to read them, I am convinced that Dante played, at the moment he wrote the poem, he played with the idea of his poems, his lines being recited. Even though he wrote for a very cultured readership, he wrote this poem as a work to be read. I believe that in the back of his mind, he also knew that it was going to circulate, as happened with other earlier lyrics by Dante himself and other poets. I mean, sonnets were circulating and were being recited orally. also because not everybody had access to books or paper. So this was a real dimension of medieval life, to hear a poem being recited and being acted out. And what do you think, Riccardo?
Oh, I could add, it's open, this, you can hear me? No, it works. I could add that usually when you hear some conference about maybe Mozart, no? Some musician, really, and it is, it goes with a performance of somebody that plays some music from Mozart, you can easily recognize if the player is a professor, a professionist, or it is the son of the talker that exercitates himself in doing this. And maybe we are used to hear music, so you don't have to have studied at the music school to understand if Pavarotti has kept the wrong note, for example. But if you hear Dante's verses, I don't want to talk about every poetry, but about Dante specifically, there are so many things that you should know, because what is an endecasyllab? It is not so easy. It is not just a verse of 11 syllables. And you have to know many things to feel the musicality of the verses that are almost lost in every recitation I hear usually. And even if you must know, I could make many examples, but it's later, so I won't do it. But you have to know them, but you don't have to make here those. For example, there are just say I have to say just two things before to make me understood. The first and the second canto, or the first and the second verse of the comedy, nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita, mi ritrovai per una selva oscura. Those two verses have two different musicalities. The first is called endecasillabo a maiori. It is like the accordo, the chord, the chord major.
Mm-hmm.
And it has the main accents at the second, the sixth, and the 10th syllable. While the second verse, it is un endecasillabo a minori, and has the accent, the main accents at the fourth, sixth, and 11th, and 10th. So that the definition is that the last accent must be on the 10th syllable. But you have different musicalities depending on the position of the other accent. It is very technical. But everybody, I know the comedy by heart, okay, but no, it is not this way, okay.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you.
Welcome.
I think that we
Well,
finished.
thank you
our
very much.
conversation.
Yes, I believe we also
Thank you.
are in time. And thanks, everybody. Thank you, Riccardo. Thank you, Kristina. This was wonderful.
Thank
Do
you
you have
all for
any
joining us.
questions? Non si era detto un po' di domande?
I don't think
Sono
we have
domande?
time for. We do? Okay, so we have time for some questions, of course. Why not? Great.
That's the Divine Comedy. That's the Divine Comedy. Does the so did Dante structure the Divine Comedy in order to be memorized or easily
I am a partisan in this thing because I can only answer yes, of course. There is a mnemophily, we could say, that involves different aspects depending on the canto and on the cantica, because un inferno, many things happens, and so you can grasp to what in the medieval times was called the memoria rerum, the memory for the things, so that you can visualize the scene. In paradise, it's more helpful the so-called memoria verborum, or memory for the words, because of course the structure, the rhyme. What can I say is that I don't have the comedy open here, but I reconstruct automatically verse after verse. In some canto of Inferno, it is present in every aspect, but Paradise is much less compressible. So, but I can reconstruct the text. This could be an issue for a conference of neurophysiology, I think so, but I don't know.
It's also the fact that it was written in terza rima so that the scribes who were copying it, right, so the third rhyme, so that the scribes wouldn't make an error. So there's a way in which that predictable third rhyme, right, if the scribes who were copying it in that day were pre-printing press, right, if that rhyme was missing, then they would know that they had made an error. So it was written also in a way that it could be copied more easily and more accurately.
And yet, the matter of the text
Don't
and
actually have
we
a
don't have the
hologram.
original text, so it's a tortured
Philology
topic.
is
Right. The philology, and then there's also the performance.
But it is true.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much. It was a wonderful polyphony. It was beautiful. Have had Francesco. I've had your book on my desk for months now, but only now I'm struck by title. And I also noticed that the title of the presentation, the first slide, is slightly different. The first slide is Dante and Performance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Dante and Performance. The title of your book is Dante's Performance. Now, the most common reading of the title, Dante's Performance, is Dante as a performance, as a performer, so a performance made by Dante. So my question for you is whether this ambiguity is intentional, or
I slightly changed the title. Thank you. This is a great question. It allows me to talk about the title, which is always a delicate matter. Here we are doing Dante and a performance of Dante. So I wanted to reflect, like in a mirror, the two aspects of today's event for this Dante Day. Music, dance, and drama, of course, are the elements that I discuss. And also the elements that Riccardo has brought on this stage, because he has been using music, dance, with his bodily movement and drama. In the title, as you can still see in the image up there, it is Dante's Performance. It took me a long time before I actually resolved to use that word performance in the title of my book, because it is not a medieval or philological word. It was not used, performance was not used as a word. It doesn't sound like anything medieval. But for lack of a better term, that is the one word we would use today to as an umbrella for music, dance, and drama, that are indeed the three aspects I use there. And then, what is Dante's performance? I believe, in a way, it is also his incredible poetic ability. He was able to write 14,233 lines of pure perfection, and under every point of view. So even though writing is a type of performance that allows the author time to go back and change, it is still quite an accomplishment, I believe, and an incredible performance to have come up with this complete poem that has shaped the literature of Italy, and not just Italy, for centuries. So, well, thanks for noting the difference between the title of the book and the title of the event. I think it is meaningful. There is a little reason there. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for the show today. I'm wondering if we wanted to hear one of the better recitations done. What would be a good one?
Riccardo Pratesi, of course. No
Yes,
doubt.
it was wonderful today.
But we can ask Riccardo. Which one is your favorite besides yours, of course.
If you want, come si dice bis?
An encore.
An encore. I can say, I would like to say the 13th of Paradise, but it's a little bit heavy in its meaning. So if you want, I can do something more national popular, like and so Ulysses. Altri recitatori bravi come me non si trovano.
But you do
No,
have
si
a
trovano
YouTube
le
channel.
io ho il mio canale.
Ecco.
I have my YouTube channel, and I have all the recitation of every canto, and but I profess myself a humble servant of Dante, so you cannot see me. You can only hear my voice. The channel is called Cose Invisibili, that means invisible things in Italian, and you have to go in the playlist, because initially I made a channel named Dante la Divina Commedia, but there are plenty of those, so it was
Not
unrecognizable.
searchable.
And so I made this new channel called Invisibili, invisible things, because they're invisible things, of course. And my channel is mainly of mathematics, because I teach mathematics at the high school. So in the channel there are mathematical things, but in the playlist you find the whole Divine Comedy, every canto recited with a miniature of Dante's in the Riccardiano 1080 that kindly was permitted me to use that wonderful image.
Great.
Did I answer?
I think you did, yes.
Thank you so much. I am an art historian, and I actually have not studied the Italian language, only opera. But you have shown many illustrations, and my question is, wouldn't some aspect of performance, since Dante has influenced so many artists, for example, Botticelli, that great series, wouldn't some aspect of performance been influenced by the art that is
Absolutely.
illustrated?
I believe so, yes. Certainly. Now I'm trying to think of, once again, opera or other forms of art that include the visual side, and I'm pretty sure that would be the case. But I am blanking on the name of the great artist who did recently. Sanderberg, thank you. Yes, exactly. You want to talk about it since you wrote on it. This is a contemporary artist who actually used.
Yes, so Sandow Burke has both illustrations that are modeled after the compositions that we saw in some of the Gustave Doré illustrations. So he takes inspiration from Gustave Doré, but he also made a movie based on the Commedia, which you can look at. But yeah, I mean, there are ways in which obviously the history of illustrations of Dante are also influenced by performances at that time. There's a scholar named Rebecca Bowen who's actually worked on this a bit, the ways in which we can see sort of the influence of liturgical drama within some of the illustrations of the Divine Comedy. I wouldn't be able to go into complete depth. It's actually a refined area of the subject, but it's an excellent question and point. There's a way in which the arts do come together within the history of Dante's influence on the arts. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much once again. Have a wonderful